Hello everyone, today we're going to do a detailed strip of a Ruger P89. This is the second in the P series models that Ruger came out with back in the late 80s. This particular model first appeared in their catalog in 1992, and I'm going to show you just inside the model a little bit. There's three different types, distinctly different types, which take apart a little bit differently. The one I'm going to be looking at today is the manual safety model, and you can note that by the safety lever on the back with two holes in it, kind of witness holes for fire and safe mode. They also made a double action model which has the bobbed hammer so it stays inside the frame and there's no lever there for manual safety. And then there's a decocker model which has a lever, but it's a decocker lever and does not have the holes in it. So keep that in mind if you're looking at taking apart one of these yourself. You can pick up the Ruger catalog from 1992 and read all about it. It's quite informative, quite fun. You can find these on eBay. So let me set all this aside. I'm going to do a quick field strip of the gun, and then we'll get into the detail strip of the slide and the frame. Okay, so let's take this gun apart. First we're going to do a safety check on it. Everything's clear. Let's remove the magazine. While we have the slide back, reach inside, push down. You can see a little tang in there. Let's push that down. That is the ejector. You'll see more of that in a minute. Now I'm going to release the slide gently. There are two possible spots to remove the slide stop. Slide stop pushes from its pin on the back side. You can remove it through the slightly rectangle hole, or you can remove it through the half moon hole, which is closer to the point where you can pull off the slide stop. I like doing that because it requires a little less pressure, a little less movement. I start pushing on the back side of the pin while I'm working to align those holes because they are invisible to see, but you can feel it once it starts to go. So as soon as that starts to go, you can pull it out all the way. The P89 has a captured slide stop. It's actually captured by a spring, so it's going to stay in place. Let's pull the slide off, set that aside. Then we've got your frame and frame components, and we'll set that aside. Next, let's go ahead and continue by taking the slide apart. First, we're going to finish the field strip, removing the guide rod and the spring. The spring, you can kind of twist it to get it out of there because it does tend to lock inside the slide. It's fatter at one end. You can separate those two components for cleaning, which is something I've already done on this gun. Now I'm going to remove the barrel. Simply lift and pull back on the barrel. Very common method for stripping a slide. Now that you've got it down to that point, there are just a few components left that we're going to remove from this. We're going to remove the ejector, which is a spring-loaded under tension component here on the side. We're going to remove the safety levers from both the right and the left. We're going to remove the firing pin and the firing pin spring. And in order to do that, the first thing you want to do is you want to remove the ejector. That comes off by pulling it towards the outside of the slide and forward, and when we get that off I'll show you why. There's a little bit of a button in there that locks into place. Easiest way I find to do that is with a tool. I don't like using metal objects on metal, but if you're very careful not to damage the edge of the extractor, you can start to put pressure on that with a small screwdriver and pull forward gently while you're doing it. Make sure you're only catching the extractor, no other components, and you can start that, feel it come loose. A little bit more pressure and it will come straight out, and remove it from the slide. You can see a little bit of a button on the back side of this, which was resting inside of an indentation in the side of the slide, and that was holding it in place. With that removed, simply pry the right side safety off. Being careful, keep it covered because there is a small plunger that's attached, but it's not under a lot of pressure, and you just slowly work that off. It's on the bottom. Show you what that looks like. There it is. There's the plunger with a little bit of a spring. You can remove that if you choose to for cleaning. We'll set that aside. Let's spin this around. So now we've removed the right side. All we have left is the left side, and there's spring pressure on the firing pin connected to this. So what we want to do is just take either your finger or a plastic object and hold down pressure on the firing pin, and then rotate the left side safety all the way down as far as it will go, straight down, and that will remove straight off. And now the pressure is off the firing pin and you can let go of that. So let that set that aside. They are different. There's no chance of getting them confused. We'll pull the firing pin and the firing pin spring out, and we'll set that aside. The only thing left on the slide are the sights themselves. This gun is aligned. I'm not going to remove them. Under the rear sight, first there's a set screw here, so you can loosen that. It's drift adjustable for windage. The front is held in place by 2 roll pins. Under the rear slide is a plunger assembly that is part of the firing pin. You can see that here. And if you want to remove that for cleaning, you do have to remove the rear sight. So let's set all of the slide components aside, and then we'll get into the frame next. I've now removed the grips from the frame, just to make that quicker for you. And the first thing we want to do is we want to remove the mainspring to take the pressure off of the hammer. Let's make sure the hammer's in the forward position. Release it if it's not. Move it in the forward position. This is all held in place by the cap, which has a pin crossing it. You want to put pressure on the bottom of it and drive the pin out. Simplest way I find to do that is simply to take the frame, put downward pressure. That way you can control it, and with a soft object or a pin punch, push that through. You'll see that come out the other side. Pull your pin out, punch out, and simply release the pressure. There's your pin. It's the only size like it in the entire pistol. You can remove your mainspring cap, and then from there, the mainspring and the hammer strut comes right out. Another thing you now want to be careful for, the pivot pin on the hammer is loose, at least on this particular pistol it is, and wants to fall right out. It would be okay, except it leaves your hammer juggling a little bit in there. You could put a piece of Scotch tape over it to hold it in place, or just keep in mind to keep your finger on it. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the ejector itself. So let's take it up to take off the spring pressure, and then we're going to simply drive the pin through the frame. Let the pin come out. There's a different size pin. There's no other pin like it. And then we'll let the extractor come down. You have the extractor, and you have the extractor spring, which is also a unique spring. It's got a dog leg off to the right and a strut down the bottom. We'll go through those. So with that removed, the next thing we want to remove is we want to remove the sear and the sear spring, and then we want to remove the blocker bar. And let's just go ahead and remove those. First thing to do is put your finger over the top of it, because the sear spring is under pressure and otherwise it will fly out on you. So let's go ahead and drive those pins out. Pin number 1, pin number 2. Remove those both from the gun. These pins are identical. If you mix them up, it's not a problem. With those removed, these components simply come out. And I'll show you how those orient so you don't have to worry about it. You can see I did not tape my hammer pivot pin, and so the hammer just wants to come out. Now the pin falls out, the hammer comes out. Now we're down to our transfer bar trigger and the slide stop. Next, you want to remove the slide stop. It's under quite a bit of pressure from the spring that rests over the top of it. You can work a tool under it and pry it out to get it out of there. I don't recommend trying to drive it through, or you can go ahead and just remove the pressure off of that spring, and that's what I like to do. So I'm going to go ahead and put a block here. There's a pin that goes over the top of the spring that holds the slide stop in place, and that pin is only part way through the frame. So we're going to be driving it into this open cavity, and then I'll show you that pin. So let's take a small 3/32 punch here, and let's line that up. And I'm just going to put my extra finger over the top of it, and then simply drive that through with a rubber mallet. And you can feel it go. A little bit of pressure there. And again, kind of keeping everything in check. Hold your hands over everything, because there's a few more components here that I'll show you that also like to let go at the same time. So if your spring actually does come out, that's fine. Just get your hand over the whole thing, not a problem. I'll show you how this goes back together. So let's remove that pin. Here's the pin that I was driving out. That pin was holding this spring in place. Let me show you why everything kind of came loose here. So the spring is oriented in that direction, with this in the back over the slide stop release, and then the front of this is actually acting as another pin, which is going to hold your slide stop plunger in place, which has its own retention unit going into the gun. This whole device was held in place by that spring, and there's a detent in that spring actually was driving down on, and all that was being held in place by that pin. Once we remove all that, take all that out of there, now your slide stop pin will come right out. Set our block aside here. And let me go ahead and remove the rest of the components. Let's take your trigger and trigger bar and remove that straight up and out. Take your trigger out. And that's as far as we're going to take it. There's one more component in here, and that's your magazine release, and that thing is quite a bear to take out. Essentially what you want to do is you want to put pressure on this leaf spring here. It's under quite a bit of pressure. You push that forward, the right side will come out quite easily, and then you have to keep manipulating and get pressure on that spring so that you can get the left side out, because the left side also has this knob, which is what holds your magazine in place and goes into that hole in your magazine. So there you have it, a completely stripped frame. Let me set some things aside here, and then we'll go through the steps to put it back together.